All right, good afternoon and welcome back. It is still your favorite, the midday show right here on Lagos Talks 91.3. My name is Paula Chine. It is time for parenting today. If you want to be an amazing parent, perhaps you are still trying to figure it out. If you're a new parent, or even if you're not yet a parent, it's always good to plan ahead. You are an uncle, an aunt, a godparent, a grandparent. This show's for you. You have to know that you're doing the right thing. Ignorance is expensive. It could cost you the well-being of a child. Thankfully, when it comes to parenting, I'm not an expert, but I know someone who is, and she is the CEO of Lagos Moms. Also, thankfully, she's my co-host on the show, and she's going to be making this a walk in the park, helping us to learn and unlearn whatever it is that we may have known the whole time. If it's wrong, you find out, and if it's right, hey, keep up with the job. I'm speaking about the one and only Miss Yetty Williams. Good afternoon, Miss Yetty.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Is it safe to say season's greetings?
Yes, no, we're in December.
I mean, but how are you?
So we have started.
I know, right? Now, Miss Yetty, today's topic, I will commend you right after saying the topic because, when you just see something, you hold your chest like, oh. So I know today's topic is discussing visible and invisible disabilities. And if anything, this just spoke volumes as regards inclusivity and just taking out the time to, make sure that we're not ignoring what we can't see. We're paying attention to both what we can see and what we can't. So I must commend you. Thank you for always making this well-rounded. You never cease to amaze me at what you do. You do it very well.
Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome. So let's not waste any time. Very quickly, I want to open up the phone lines. So maybe as we're talking, for those who want to be a part of it, they can join right from the start, if you do not mind. Okay, so
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Now, first off, you can join us via our page on X, which is also known as Twitter. Our handle is at Lagos Talks 913. If you want to join via WhatsApp, now the beauty of WhatsApp, you can get to call, send a voice note or a message. The number for WhatsApp is 0809-234-5913. You can also call that number if you want to have a chat with Miss Yetty and I, or you can call these numbers 0809 222-0913 and 015151913. All right, Miss Yetty, I really love to know, because seeing visible and invisible, is there anything like invisible disabilities?
There absolutely is.
Oh wow, please.
And that's why I wanted us to talk about it, because sometimes when people think of disabilities, right, they think of the ones that you can see, which is maybe somebody who has vision challenges, or somebody
autism,
who has physical disabilities, or somebody, like you've said, who's on the spectrum of autism, that you can visually see that there's a challenge, right? Things like Down syndrome. So there are quite a few things that you would see as a disability and immediately say, oh, that person has a disability. And in terms of inclusive language, it's also important not to call somebody a disabled person.
Ah, okay.
The person has a disability doesn't mean they're a disabled person. It's a slight change in the language, but in terms of being more inclusive and realizing that somebody who has a disability, it doesn't mean that they cannot live the fullest lives possible for them, right? What they are dealing with is a disability that they have, but that tone or that language of a disabled person suggests that they can't get on with things, or something is wrong with them. Obviously, there's a challenge, but I think it's very important in starting to change some of the language, especially in the context of our own culture. We can start to make those little changes.
Oh, wow.
And December 3rd was the International Day of Persons with Disabilities.
Oh,
right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that was a United Nations. You know how United Nations has certain days, and themes that they're pushing and trying to achieve, sustainable development goals globally. And one of the goals really is around people with disabilities. And they're saying that the world is actually off track. It's not going to hit the goals that they've set by 2030 when it comes to how people with disabilities are being included in living their fullest lives. So I thought it would be interesting also to then bring that to our audience, but not just speak about disabilities from a level of what's the UN saying, but on an individual level, community level, how do we even identify what a disability is and how the people around us, maybe they have disabilities that you can't even see, or you don't recognize. Does that mean then that they don't need additional support? They absolutely do.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. So, Miss Yetty, when we're addressing persons with disabilities, we should not define them according to these disabilities.
Yeah, don't call them as a disabled person.
We should just say, this is an individual.
A disability.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Even changes your perspective of them. They have a disability doesn't mean they are disabled.
That
makes sense.
So something that I always do when I meet persons with a disability, I call them people with extreme abilities, because they might have something that might be limited. They might be limited in some spheres in life, but I see them as people that constantly have to get out of bed and put that behind them and still persevere. So I also like to say that they're persons with extreme abilities, because some of them have to put in twice the work to do what we normally do, and it's no easy feat. But Miss Yetty, before we go on to talk about this, just knowing that persons with disabilities are limited. If any parent is listening and that parent has a child or is a guardian to a child with disabilities, and they feel overwhelmed, maybe they've done all they could, but they just feel like maybe their efforts are not good enough. If you have a word of encouragement for them, what would you tell them? Just in case, no one has told them in a while something kind, or they've not gotten a pat on the back. What would you tell one such parent if you could say something?
And I think the first thing is to first of all accept that it is challenging. The world is largely made and run, if you will, by people who maybe there's no visible challenge. Because I believe everybody has some kind of challenge or the other. It might be emotional, it might be mindset, it might be anything, right? A lot of people have different challenges they have to get through to succeed anyway. I do think that we're getting to a time when we're starting to speak more openly about some of the challenges that people who even seem to quote and unquote have succeeded. What are the challenges they had to overcome? And I think we're getting to a time now, because of the amount of knowledge and platforms and, abilities to exchange ideas that we have. I think more and more people are saying that, whatever you are going through, you are not alone. So my message really would be that you are not alone. It is difficult. You are absolutely trying your best. And if at any point you feel like, I am at my wit's end, or I can't take it anymore, or I'm frustrated, or I'm so worried about the future, or I'm so concerned about what this child is going to be able to do on his or her own, maybe when I'm not here. All of those are valid fears, right? So first of all, I would say all of those feelings, they are valid, right? Wow. So don't try to rush away from the feeling. Every single feeling you have, I really believe in journaling, writing them down, getting it out of your head, so that when you write it down, you can then say, okay, what do I want and how am I going to do something, about this particular feeling I have? So I want to just sit on one that does come up a lot, which is maybe a parent who has a child who has some kind of disability. Let's just pick autism as an example, right? And it's autism where the child needs a lot of intervention and needs a lot of support. And maybe it's a parent who thinks, even with all of these things I'm doing, even with the world, quote and unquote, being more aware of, autistic children living with autism, the parent is still concerned about the fact that maybe the kind of autism the child has is quite severe, and that child might not be able to hold down their own job or things like that in the future, and they are concerned. If we paint that scenario, that's a fair concern.
Yeah, it is.
Is that because for the most other parents, you're thinking, I'm going to send my child to school, they're going to graduate, they're going to get a job, they're going to fend for themselves. For a parent who they cannot necessarily see that projection currently because of the type of disability the child has, the parent has to realize that is a reality. And then the best thing you can do is to say, what does that mean? And then that's where the solutions start to come up. For example, is there a kind of, life insurance you need to have for yourself as a parent so that when anything happens, everybody's prayer is that we'll live to be old and gray, yes, but we all pray that as parents, we leave the world before our children, right? So if you're thinking ahead, okay, how do I plan for this child in the future? What are some of the things I'm going to put in place? Sometimes those parents need to have somebody who's like a trusted, either like a trustee. They can create a trust for that child. They can have somebody who's going to, what's that word I'm looking for? Forget it flew out of my head, but basically somebody who you legally sign up to be the person that will take care of that child in the future. So there are things you must do. You cannot just wish it away or just pray it away, right? I'm not saying prayer is not important, but being able to be honest, and I believe honesty is honestly the best policy, because when you see your reality, you see your children's reality, you realize you have a child with a bit more challenges that must be supported. You have to make a plan for them. You can't just hope for the best. So I hope that has helped to answer your question.
Yes.
If somebody's listening, please know you're doing your best. But in any area you're feeling overwhelmed, there's a reason you feel overwhelmed. Sit down and think about what is it you want or need to feel less overwhelmed. And then you start looking for the solutions.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Yetty. So I have a question from a listener. It says, good afternoon, Paula and the parenting lady in the studio. Please explain what is invisible disability. Is someone disabled when you cannot see it? Please, I'm listening to learn. Thank you, Ma. That's Oriyomi Salami.
Okay. I like that. The parenting lady. I'm going to write that one down. But yes, so quickly getting into what, I think we can all say, or we kind of know what visible disabilities are. What are invisible disabilities? Invisible disabilities are conditions such as, right, depression. Because according to the WHO, depression is going to be the leading cause of disability by 2030, 2050?
Really?
I forget the year.
Really?
So depression is not something that's visible. You don't see somebody in front of you necessarily and say, oh, that person has depression.
True.
Or that person has been clinically diagnosed to have depression and they are maybe getting therapy, or maybe they are getting medicines, antidepressants to deal with the depression. Depression is something that is more from a chemical, neurological level. So it's not something you will see. That doesn't mean that person doesn't have a disability that they're dealing with. So that is an example of an invisible disability. Another example of a visible disability is somebody who maybe has a learning disability, like dyslexia.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Or ADHD.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
A disability at the end of the day is something you have, or something somebody has that affects the quality of their life somehow. And they're having to do extra work, or they need intervention to be able to still succeed and thrive to their best ability, but they need some external help. So, for example, ADHD is one. And we're finding that there are more adults who are being diagnosed with ADHD, because there are some of these conditions that, many years ago, they weren't even a thing. People were not talking about it. It wasn't, people didn't pick it up. They'll just say, that child is naughty. That child can never sit down in class. That child gets bored all the time. That child will just start daydreaming when they're in class. Those are some of those signs that if it's not managed, that child becomes an adult who has some of those challenges. So that's an example of an invisible disability that you might not know. So in an office space, for example, you could be in a meeting and maybe you have meetings that go on and on and on. Some people can sit through it, no challenge, or some people will be so fidgety, or they get bored quickly, Or you see they are the ones that are just doodling. Their paper, by the time you are done, is covered with drawing over the place. Wow. So imagine. So these are the levels of saying, what is an invisible disability? It's something somebody is dealing with that you on the external side, you might not see it up front, but they might still be dealing with that. And if we have a world that doesn't, it's almost like now we expect that you go to certain places, and if somebody's in a wheelchair, you expect certain places to have wheelchair access, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that is more it's done more in the Western world, for example. A lot of buildings will be wheelchair accessible. That is making it inclusive for somebody who is physically challenged and in a wheelchair to be able to come into a building, maybe without anybody having to push them. They can operate it themselves. They can press the button. They can enter the building. It's the same thing with invisible disabilities. People still need some kind of support, but the world currently is not fully set up to accommodate some of those